All right, we are now broadcasting live. I want to welcome everyone to this episode of the Social Club at the End of the World, with emphasis on Guy McPherson's latest predictions. That just kind of gives us a starting point, but really we go far and wide from there. And I want everyone to know that anyone who has an internet connection can join this video conference and actually be like the rest of us and show your faces and have your say. And so I've posted the link on my YouTube channel, on the video. There's like a 4-minute video I posted some days ago called Instructions on How to Join Hangouts. So it's there. Also on my Facebook, also on my Google+. And I've been intending to get an email list going, but haven't quite done that yet, other than those of us who are regulars, to kind of the broader community. And also I want to be able to post these on radish.org, which we haven't quite set up yet for that. But anyway, right now we're just kind of cobbling it together. So if you can join, we'd love to have you. And then, of course, we always love to get people's comments on the YouTube video. I want to welcome you all who are here right now. I want to welcome Dan in Chicago, Jason in Long Beach, and Victoria in Oklahoma. I'm going to go on mute so y'all can say hello to the world before it comes to an end.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Dan in Chicago. Good to be here, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Greetings from Oklahoma. Ditto that on Dan. Welcome everyone.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Jason. Welcome.
Awesome, good stuff. Okay, well, we don't really have an agenda, though. I emailed one agenda point out to everyone, which is that we talk about actually doing something about this predicament, systematically using, drumroll, radical collective intelligence. And the basic idea there is that we organize ourselves so that anyone and everyone can participate, not just in, kind of general video conferences such as this one, but that folks can also participate in myriad conversations. Imagine just thousands of parallel conversations about the various solutions that we can, and I believe should, implement in order to save as much of life on Earth as we can, and also to buy us some time, like refreezing the Arctic, putting up essentially giant reflective mirrors in the Arctic, which can be done very efficiently and effectively using thin film reflective materials suspended by, for example, blimps or towers or ships. There's lots of ways to get a lot of reflective surface area up in the Arctic and just reflect away that sunlight back into space, particularly this summer. Because if we don't take measures like that, it's very predictable what's going to happen. We're going to run out of ice. We're going to completely obliterate the air conditioner of the entire northern hemisphere of the planet, which is the Arctic ice. It reflects away the sunlight. It keeps us cool. And it's sort of like a bank account of ice. Instead of a bank account of money that you can spend when you need to, it's a bank account of ice that's been absorbing and absorbing and absorbing the heat. And just like a bank account, when it's all gone, the company goes bankrupt. When our ice in the northern Arctic is all gone, the planet goes bankrupt in so many ways. I mean, the loss of reflectivity is just the beginning, but of course that allows for just massive absorption of heat by the dark blue ocean water that used to be reflected away by the ice. And that will kick off catastrophic heating, catastrophic releases of methane, and just all kinds of horrible impacts on weather, climate, food production, you name it. So anyway, for me, refreezing the Arctic and restoring the natural mirror to reflect away sunlight in the summer months is absolutely crucial. And but that's just one example of things that we can do if we put our heads together and figure out how. And when I say how, I don't just mean the engineering solutions. I mean the financial solutions, the political solutions, the social solutions, the PR and marketing, the mass media solutions, with a nod to Miss Victoria, all the solutions that we need in order to actually make this stuff happen. See, well, I'm just going to kind of rant for a second since I got the bully pulpit. But we doomsdayers, to give us a derogatory name, pointing the finger at myself, and really that's not fair. I mean, we're reality seekers. We seek reality. We seek the truth, and then we seek to see what we can do about that. But one of my kind of beefs about us, including myself as a community, is we spend a lot of time talking, but what are we actually doing to ameliorate, to mitigate, to prevent this oncoming disaster? And ironically, talk is the first step, but I would love to see us and the world start to make the transition to talk with a view to action, talk with a view to getting something done, as opposed to, just kind of like support group. Oh, we're all going to die, and so let's talk about that. How do you feel about that? Oh, how do you feel? Oh, I feel terrible. I'm not making. I guess I am. That's kind of unfair, but I'm not poking fun because I do plenty of this myself. And that's an important first step for a lot of people. You kind of got to feel our way into it. And so I sort of see it kind of like, different levels of education as a metaphor. First you got grammar school, and then you got middle school, and then you got high school, and then you got university. So for the people who are just opening their eyes and learning about the ongoing catastrophe and just how close we are to extinction, let's call that grammar school. You just kind of got to kind of feel your way into it, talk about it. And that's why we have these online support group kind of forums like this one, how this one came into life. But what I'm suggesting is that this group here, that we kind of start to graduate into a higher level. I want to put it out there for discussion, because we can take some serious steps, including right now today on this Hangout, to start to affect this sort of graduation and this evolution from, just talking about it to talk with a view to action, to getting something done. So with that, bully pulpit ramp, I'm going to go on mute and let you all weigh in. Thank you.
So picking up on what you've been saying, Jamin, being able to move to a level beyond appreciating how dire the situation is, and that inaction is a recipe for probably ultimate extinction. And what I find the most difficult roadblock is being able to penetrate the denial mechanisms, which includes complete ignorance. How many people are going to be listening to what we're saying, or how many people ever listen to what Guy McPherson was saying? So we have a tremendous population in the United States and elsewhere in the world that are just completely ignorant about what is even unfolding. And then we have the problem that the mass media, by and large, censors any true discussion of climate change and the implications that flow from it. So we're dealing with that, which may be, at the end of the day, impossible to overcome in a timely fashion. Remains to be seen. And then we have those who know something. Yeah, I think it's a serious situation. However, I think we have time. I've talked on the social club a couple of times about, a short-term horizon from to 2040 or so, 2050, and then going out long-term 2070, 2100 or beyond. But nobody really who's knowledgeable from a scientific place denies the fact that we're going to get a very dystopian result, whether it's sooner or later. And so just on the basis of what is in the hopper, what is going to come, action ought to be taken, of course, like yesterday. I would, maybe I could just do it really briefly now. I just want to read, I was going to read a lot more, but just a brief little paragraph or two from Peter Wadham's book, Farewell to Ice. And for those of you who don't know, Peter Wadhams is the foremost expert in the world on the Arctic. He's recently retired from Cambridge University. He's a oceanographer, a geophysicist. I'm not sure exactly how you classify him scientifically, but he's definitely the world's #1 expert on the Arctic meltdown. And he's a very conservative kind of guy, but he's very truthful. So I'm going to read just briefly what he is. He's talking about some testing that he and some other scientists did. And I'm going to quote now. We tested 2 standard emissions scenarios. First was the business as usual scenario, where it is assumed that the world carries on following its present course with increasing emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases year on year without any mitigating actions. Secondly, we ran a low emissions case with a 50% chance of keeping the rise in global mean temperatures below 2 degrees centigrade or Celsius. In each case, we superposed a decade-long pulse of 50 gigatons of methane released into the atmosphere between 2015 and 2025. We also explored the impacts of later, longer-lasting or smaller pulses of methane. The exact temperature rise due to the methane by 2040, according to this model, is 0.6 degrees centigrade, a substantial extra contribution. This would be a catastrophe for mankind, partly because it is so quick. It would speed up all the other global warming effects, and there would be nothing that we could do to shut off the methane except for cooling the water column, i.e. bringing back the sea ice, which is exceedingly difficult to envisage. Such a methane pulse would bring forward by 15 to 35 years the date at which the global mean temperature rise exceeds 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, to 2035 for the business as usual scenario, or 2040 for the low emissions scenario. And I'm just going to stop there, but people can check it out. It's a book called Farewell to Ice by Peter Wadhams. I think it was actually published right at the end of 2016, maybe December 2016. And I've heard Peter Wadhams essentially say that, Guy McPherson's dystopian outlook is what you have to look forward to unless something is done. And Peter Wadhams, by the way, one other thing that he mentions is that he criticizes the climate scientist community for their lack of nerve in terms of stepping out and saying what they really should fully understand. And again, it's just part of it goes into the overall censorship that we've become, everybody's in our society and other places have become victimized by. So I just wanted to throw that in there, and I'm going to go ahead and mute out and turn it over to someone else.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'm just going to jump in for a minute, and then I'll mute myself so we can give Jason and Victoria an opportunity. But I just want to point out that it's really becoming clear for me, building on what I was talking about. Great points, by the way, Dan, and I really appreciate you bringing those up. But getting back to kind of the metaphor that all of humanity and Mother Earth, we're all like in this van, and the van is going down this steep hill, steep gravelly road towards the edge of a cliff. There are people in the van who are just asleep, right? And they're just like, don't wake me up, just leave me alone, shut up. Okay, they're not terribly useful to us right now. They'll wake up when they wake up, and maybe they'll wake up partly because of us, but I just want to name that category. Then there's the category of deniers. They're not asleep, but they're just denying that anything's going on. They're in the conversation, they're just on the wrong side of the conversation. And then there are those of us who just talk. And that's, I actually think that's part of the problem. And then there are those of us who are actually doing something about it. And I think that's where it really gets interesting, because I think what's going to both A, wake other people up, B, get the deniers, off their comfy couch of just sitting there and denying, and also the people who are just talking. Once they see that people are taking action, radical action. When I say radical, I mean action that gets to the root of our problems. I think that'll start to shift things. So that's where I propose we take the conversation. What can we actually do, and how do we set ourselves up for success for these actions to actually have an impact? And with that, I'm going to go on mute.
I'll jump in there. I totally agree, Jamin. I had an interesting conversation last evening with someone who's been a friend of mine for a long time. And he looked at me and he said, okay, so what can I as a citizen do? Should I call a politician? What can I do? And I thought, that's a great question. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's one of the things I wanted to bring up today. And Dan, and what you were speaking of, to me, I look at it as degrees of ignorance. Like you say, it's certainly not stupidity. But as the gentleman told me last evening, you say it's really out there, but for those of us that are working 10 hours a day, picking up kids, you know what I'm saying? It's not on the normal places. So there is an ignorance even of some really smart, intelligent, engaged people. I'll mute out.
I think that I agree with you, Jay. Something major has to be done, and that the people are sort of oblivious. And I recently just came back from Costa Rica, and it's a country that a lot of people say has a lot of and all these such things, that they're taking care of the environment, and it's probably true. They take care of their environment maybe a lot better than some of the countries around them in Central America and maybe South America. But also all these people are taking planes into there, and so there's just a sort of separation in people's minds too, about some people literally think they're doing enough by driving a Prius, and when you try to bring up the really bad stuff, they kind of just, I even got somebody who agreed with me on what's going on, but no one really thinks, who knows if it's possible to do anything about it. I guess if anything, maybe Jamin, you should be outside of like Northrop Grumman and Boeing and SpaceX, and you should be letting them know, or maybe we could all go. We should be letting them know that they're maybe the only people who are going to come up with the solutions to these massive problems, and that we need smart people in the aerospace industry to start trying to release in the science, who are doing science and making things happen and building cool shit, need to change their focus from creating weapons of war to creating the solutions that are going to save the human species and the planet, the stable climate. Maybe that would be one way that just kind of came to my mind as we were all talking. But if we don't wake people up and people don't start actually focusing on huge solutions to these large problems, then it's going to end up like Peter Wadhams says, and Guy McPherson sort of says. And I think the only thing that people can do is try to learn how to grow food and, learn survival skills as best they can. Because, we're kind of just like, oh. But I think I spent a lot of time in Costa Rica, and their whole saying is like Pura Vida, which is like pure life, but it means a lot more deeply like sort of like no worries, like, whatever, and it's a greeting, and it's like all these things. But the whole thing of my trip was trying to learn that, there really is no control that we have over life and in life. Being an anxious person who always is trying to trying to control things, maybe it was a learning lesson for me. And I think that was good in the sense of maybe just coming to terms with it possibly being the end of the world coming soon due to abrupt climate change. But also maybe Dan would say something like this kind of like whatever kind of attitude is sort of part of the problem, possibly part of the puzzle in part of the problem, in just kind of like, I can't think about that. Like, I'm just going to continue going on and doing what I'm doing. At least in my mind, I have, tried to do things like start to grow my own food so I can, learn how to do that. And if that was done on a larger scale and more people were growing more of their food in the urban area, that would, free up land in other places, which is what I've sort of talked about before. But also, we'd need people to come up with big solutions like starting to suck carbon and other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. Even though people go, oh, it's such a ridiculous idea. It's like, well, if we're going to do anything, that's one of the things that we could do, like force cities or force corporations to suck it out or not be releasing it, at some point, but we live in a denier world, I guess. So that's why Guy McPherson looks at it like it's hopeless. Anyways, I'm going to mute it out. Someone else.
Just to jump in with a couple of thoughts. It always, and I've mentioned this at various social club meetings, if we don't have the authority figure community, in particular the climate scientists who presumably understand at this point in time, maybe they didn't understand back in the 1990s, or maybe they didn't understand even up until 2005, 2006, what was in front of us. But at this point, we've gone a good decade since that kind of turning point, somewhere around 05, 06, 07, in terms of the meltdown dynamic, the Arctic melting and the methane being released. So they have to be encouraged, perhaps protected in some kind of a way by society, so that they can step forward and propose what could be done. They are confronted by, and again, it may be that they themselves, I've often felt this maybe about Michael Mann, that he's unable to fully assimilate himself the implications of everything for human beings, such as his own family. But Michael Mann, Jason Box, Guy McPherson, it's Peter Wadhams. These scientists have been intimidated and threatened in various ways. And so that's something which is always out there. For whatever reasons, the forces which are very, very powerful, very wealthy, can exercise a good deal of coercion on these scientists, and they have to be encouraged to speak. Again, I think I've mentioned, and a lot of people are going to know that, the president of Finland, who's an authority figure in Finland, but not really in the United States or other parts of the world. He himself said when he was visiting here with Donald Trump that if the Arctic goes, the globe goes. But it's still got no traction. Even the president of Finland stating that while he's having a news conference with Donald Trump. I mean, this is where we're at. And so I do see that if we're going to put pressure, if there is some effective way of doing it, it needs to be focused, I think, particularly on the scientific community in some sort of a way, because they are the ultimate authority figures about what's happening with the global implosion. I'm going to go ahead and mute out.
All right. Good stuff, everyone. So I'm going to next put a challenge on the table that I invite each of us and our listening audience to input on. And my challenge is, you know, we talk about a lot of things. Oh, this needs to happen, that needs to happen, this should happen, the scientists should speak out, they should be encouraged, you know, should. I hear a lot of shoulds. The challenge I'm going to put out there is just to see if, you know, what happens. If there were one thing that you, and I'll put my thing on the table in a moment, but for all of us, think of one thing that we could focus on that would start to turn the tide, right? Like if you've got a battleship or something, an aircraft carrier, and you want to get it to turn, well, the one thing you could do is move the rudder. It's not going to turn immediately, but it's going to start to get the whole thing to turn on maybe a 5-mile radius or something, but at least it'll start it. So what is that one action that you think has the greatest potential to start a global transformation? And I'll go first, since I've got the microphone. And the one thing that I propose is that we complete the organization and launch of radical collective intelligence. That, for me, is the beginning of the turning of the rudder. Because by doing so, see, radical collective intelligence is, by its very nature, conversation with a view to action, with a view to actually transforming life on Earth and solving all of our problems, one at a time or 100 at a time, whatever the collective intelligence figures out. You see, and my fundamental thesis is that the key, to put it in really simple terms, radical collective intelligence is nothing more and nothing less than humanity coming together and working together as a coordinated intelligence and a coordinated community, rather than a bunch of us being, for the most part, isolated. And yeah, putting blog posts and Facebook posts and liking this and unliking that and commenting on this, but we're still, I posit, operating from a paradigm of separation. And yeah, from time to time we get together in groups like this and we talk even publicly, like on the social club at the end of the world, which I see as kind of a crucial precursor to what I'm proposing. But what I propose is that we take it all the way towards humanity coming together as a community. And it could start with just, you know, a dozen of us, but that we come together and start to operate along the principles of radical collective intelligence, which basically says we have conversations, again, with a view to action, and we record those conversations like we're doing right now. We transcribe the conversations using artificial intelligence. We index those transcriptions so they can be searchable. We map those indexings and the text of those and the transcription of those conversations to various taxonomies, which organize the conversations into different topics, which are interconnected and interrelated, as I'll show a little bit later on this call, to give kind of just a super brief overview of what I'm talking about, so that people who are then interested in talking about permaculture can go join the permaculture group. People who are interested in talking about refreezing the Arctic can join that group. And so rather than just kind of going round and around and around about the zillions of different possibilities, we divide and conquer. And people can go to whatever groups they want and join those groups. And in fact, the refreezing the Arctic group would then break out. And this is, you know, this gets to the taxonomy part of it, breaks it out into an organized tree structure of topics, so that you have those who are focused on the problem. And so, you know, there you'd have presentations by Peter Wadhams and his book and things like that and all the relevant information. What's the problem? People who talk about ways to solve that problem, and I'll show some stuff on that a little bit later, and then folks who are focusing on specific solutions that actually execute on those ways of solving the problem. And to kind of fast forward along, what the process would then take us to is we would evolve certain solutions at the design level and at the modeling level, and then say, look, we've got, and then get to the point where we say, look, we've got solutions designed, modeled, ready to go. Okay, now how do we fund them? How do we actually make them happen? Well, then you'd have groups focusing on that. How do we get the funding for this? How do we influence government? How do we influence the private sector? How do we influence the aerospace industry? And then, you know, rather than just Jamin going with his sign in front of Northrop Grumman or whatever, or Boeing, you have a whole collective intelligence saying, okay, how do we orchestrate this kind of influence on the government, on the private sector, on the nonprofit sector? So that's all I'm going to say for right now. But that's the one thing I propose, is that we consummate this radical collective intelligence, bring it to life in a big way, in an organized way. And that's what I work on every day, by the way. So I'm walking the talk. This is what I'm doing. But my proposal is that we all do it. And so now I'm going to go on mute, and I'd love to hear from you all if you'd like to accept the challenge and say, well, I think we should all do this. Like, for example, I heard a comment, somebody posted a comment on one of our first social clubs saying, shut up and plant some trees, right? Well, hey, you know, I give the dude credit for his, you know, he's got a proposal. Shut up, start talking, and let's all go out and plant trees. So that's another proposal. But I'd love to hear from all of us. What's the one thing we should do to actually start to transform life on Earth and save life on Earth? Going on mute.
I'm going to be attending, if I've mentioned it, a conference during the week of March 19th, 20th, called Dying in the Americas 2018. And this is something which is sponsored by individuals who are interested in, you know, death with dignity, final exit network, etc. So these are individuals who are concerned with how do you treat yourself or others who are in a terminal disease situation, not just cancer. So I'm going to be out there. I'm going to talk with people and see if there are individuals involved in that who also are up to speed on climate change, because I really believe in, you know, from my own point of view, my history as a therapist and you know, kind of specializing in mental health, emotion management. Unfortunately, people have to ponder a couple of things that I've mentioned before. And I may even try to create a workshop or a presentation that addresses this. If we get one of these really negative outcomes, particularly short term, which could happen, how do you want to treat the issue of the impending death of yourself, your children, your grandchildren, etc.? It's a very unpleasant thing to think about. If you know, but if you don't think about it, then you may not have the ability to really handle it in some sort of a rational, humane way. And I really believe that that is a critical thing. People have to understand that, you know, I mean, I'll often say to people, and I know, you know, they don't want to talk about it, but I'll say something like, you know, the same way that you would want to euthanize your dog or your cat in a humane way, have them be put down, rather than die a long, painful death from cancer or whatever disease they have. Maybe this is something that you would want to be prepared to be able to do with your own children or grandchildren, etc. This is a very unpleasant territory to have to go into. But without actually assimilating this possibility, I think it becomes very, very difficult for people to really face up to it in a realistic way and have the anxiety to propel them to start shouting to whatever authority figures they have access to that we need to do something, whether it's short term or medium term kind of a situation. So that's something which I think is important. And when I am at this conference, I'm going to do my best to have conversations, see if I can connect with some individuals involved in this who are very experienced with issues just concerning death with dignity, and see if maybe we can collaborate in some kind of a way, because I know that if things really do go bad, I would imagine people would like to have access to some sort of humane method of saying goodbye, because it can be done in a fairly smooth, easy fashion, or it can be done the hard way. And there's a lot of hard ways that things could go. So I'm going to go ahead and mute out.
I appreciate the challenge, Damon. As you know, I've been struggling with this. I am going to the Sierra Club dinner in San Francisco to see what else I can learn, soak up, and all of that. I am looking to create some kind of a list so that in my daily life, when I speak to people who go, yeah, I'm concerned about climate, but what can we do about it other than I drive a Prius and I don't buy water bottles anymore. It would be great to have a credible something that could address that. I also, Dan, have been looking at creating a presentation or a website, and I thought, I could go all these groups that need speakers around here. Well, in my current position, couldn't do that, but the presentation I feel would be helpful, and a workshop, although that is being done. And I reached out, I'm in a group call tonight with those that are doing that to bring back some information to this group. So I think that I would love to hear Jamin do an overview, because I feel your idea of the radish, Jamin, is going to address what I think is crucial and so critical for everybody, is look at our spheres of influence. They're all different. And I think that's how we're going to crack what we're trying to do. I'll mute out.
So I hear what you're saying, Jamin, but I guess I don't really understand your call to action. It doesn't really have a very pointed call to action. Because then I heard Dan sort of go on about like what he thinks he can do and he can add to this, which Dan is in very accepted mood that it's too fucking late. I think that's pretty proper, and that he'd like to help people mentally, psychiatrically cope with, the end of the living world. And how do you say goodbye to relatives and family and stuff if that is the case? And you were sort of saying that in radical collective intelligence, there sort of be breakouts. And I think it's an interesting idea, but sometimes people only have time for like one call during the week. And I don't know if we're going to necessarily open up other channels, which you've maybe suggested. But, maybe this social club at the end of the world can be more of activists or people who are trying to do something, their own particular thing about it, kind of pep talk each other and give each other ideas and brainstorming ideas for how to get something really done on it. And having that all in a centralized place on that website could be good. So I think we're doing what you're talking about, but each person, even in this conversation, maybe has a different way of looking at it. Or I think it would be great to be able to work with, who knows, Peter Wadhams and the future president of the United States, and get them to talk to the other leaders of the biggest economies in the world to actually put together a plan for dealing with the methane gas and dealing with trying to keep the Arctic frozen and dealing with building things that are going to try to suck carbon out of the atmosphere instead of putting it in, which are very difficult because if you have to build something, how do you offset the carbon of building something? But to start actually getting somewhere, I mean, it may never happen. So something like Dan's talking about of just sort of starting to mentally, prepare yourself for it is also a necessary thing. And, because what I've maybe focused on with food isn't necessarily going to save us from the Arctic ice melting. And because a lot of people are doing that now and they think that, everything's going to be fine. I've talked to some of them. And they don't really get the scope of how bad the warming could be and how this is really going to affect the entire planet. So I don't even, I think it's hard to come up with one actionable thing. But I guess, to maybe have this channel be about coming on and talking about being more of like a mastermind of sorts for doomers who actually want to try to do something positive in the end, even if it's too late. And seeing how radical collective intelligence grows from there, trying to get someone to start up a channel on real scientific solutions, like how could we build something that would actually start sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and turning it into crystals. I mean, there's companies that work on this, but the problem is maybe it needs to be a collective of people who aren't trying to profit from it necessarily, because maybe it's not hugely profitable. But people who say, well, this needs to be done, right? Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. I mean, each person, I think, is trying to, in their own way, do something positive about it. Anyways, I'm going to zone out. You hop in there, Jamin.
Okay, I actually kind of forgot the order. Dan, have you spoken since I last spoke? Or not? Yep. Okay. All right. So let me address what y'all have suggested, because I really see the potential for it all essentially merging into one, not merging into one conversation, one single conversation, but merging into one collective intelligence. And I'll start with a couple of your points, Jason. So first of all, I really like that you used the word breakouts, because that's really exactly what I'm talking about. Jason, I know you go to a lot of, you go to conferences from time to time, as I do, and Dan's going to a conference in Las Vegas. At Victoria, I see rocking her head up and down. At these conferences, what there generally happens is at the beginning, there's like a big general session, right? And, everyone's kind of in the same giant auditorium or arena or whatever, hearing a few speakers, and then everyone, at least has that as sort of a common nut, and then a common basis. And then you break out into dozens, or in some cases, literally hundreds of breakout rooms where individual topics can be addressed. And that's where you kind of focus on what you really want to focus on. That is very much the model of Radish, is that we let 1,000 or thousands of flowers bloom in terms of these different conversations. So someone who wants to talk about, how do you grow your own food, they can go to that breakout room and talk about that. Or maybe there's multiple on that front. Those who want to talk about, end of life and end of life conversations and death with dignity can talk about that. Those who want to talk about the strategy of leveraging death with dignity conversations as a vehicle or a springboard to get a broader conversation happening about abrupt climate change and what we can do about that, they can talk about that, right? Those who want to talk about radical collective intelligence itself, like myself, we can talk about that. Now, so great point there. Another really good point you made, Jason, was that sometimes people only have time for one call per week. Understood. People have busy schedules, busy lives. Then my suggestion would be, within the context of radical collective intelligence, that they identify what is that topic that they would like to participate in during that one call per week. If it's permaculture, it's permaculture. If it's cleaning up the oceans, it's cleaning up the oceans. But that they go to that conversation. And crucially, if that conversation does not yet exist, if it hasn't yet been organized, then take the lead on it. Organize it yourself. And we'll publish it on Radish so that other people can join, just like other people can join this conversation. Victoria, getting to your point, that it's one thing that you said, that it's crucial that we look at our spheres of influence, right? Each of us has different communities that we're engaged in and that we have the ear of. And this maps back to the point that we can each pick that topic or those topics that we want to spend our 1 hour per week on, right? And bring in people from our sphere of influence and say, look, I'm leading a conversation on this. I know you all are interested in this general topic. Please join us. Here's the time. Here's the link. Here's how to do it. And then, Victoria, I also like your idea about creating presentations, having workshops. All this can be done within the context of radical collective intelligence. And then back to Dan, back to your points about, all of these conversations can propel people to start shouting at authority figures, right? So, Dan, maybe you could lead a conversation about how do we get the attention of authority figures? What are the various different ways? And then that might even break out into half a dozen, child conversations, if you will, or child topics that say, using the topic of death with dignity as a vehicle for, shouting at authority figures, right? Or exposing information about Arctic ice in a presentation, as Victoria was saying, a presentation about Arctic ice to wake people up so that they will start shouting at authority figures, right? So we've got these different kind of vectors for action and for transformation. What's exciting about radical collective intelligence is it can bring all these together under one giant circus tent, which has some common principles that we all agree to, such as, number one, we believe in action. We don't all necessarily agree on exactly what type of action is top priority, and that's fine. We're not trying to get everyone to be just a total monoculture, but we all believe in action. We all believe in saving life, saving as much of life as possible, and we believe in collective intelligence. We believe that it's much more powerful for 1,000 of us to get together and coordinate in some ways, shapes, or forms, like we're talking about, than all of us just kind of sitting in our own offices or basements or rooftop decks and contemplating and writing and blogging and gardening on our own, right? It's just some core principles that those of us who want to come together and work together can agree to. And even that could be a topic for discussion. I'm not trying to be Moses and just kind of lay it down from on high and say this is how it is or this is how it should be, but I'm just putting my 2 cents out there. So I'm going to go on mute in a few seconds, but let y'all have a chance to talk. But then when it's my turn again, what I'd propose is to actually present a bit about specifically what I'm talking about how we can actually make this happen in an organized, systematic way. Thank you. I'll go on mute.
I'll jump in here since I have to jump out pretty soon. And I'm up to speed because I've been watching all your videos, Jamin, that you've been posting on collective intelligence. Anyway, I'm glad to be a part of it. Jason, you and I don't know. You guys are a great group. I'm excited. I hope that more people do come in, and lots of good ideas here. I think you're right. It's distilling them down and actually taking action on the points that we can. And I think you're giving us a good vehicle. So onward and upward.
So just to say a little bit more about my thoughts on, death with dignity, etc. I think that unless people can contemplate their own passing along with the passing of, if they have children, their children, if they have grandchildren, their grandchildren, and actually having to look at that as a possibility, not a done deal, but a possibility. It's very hard to get someone to just simply say, against all of the propaganda, all of the beliefs that are already hardened in people's minds, either that we don't have a problem, Donald Trump, it's a Chinese hoax type stuff, or we have plenty of time to address the problem, as if at a certain point it'll be addressed. So in order to get people to really sit up and take notice of it, something has to penetrate the resistance. And one of the things I've always had a problem with concerning Guy McPherson is that his point of view is, we're done. He doesn't really at this point even give us 2026 to look forward to. And so his thing is, we're done. And now is the time to come to acceptance, live your life with love as much as possible, et cetera, with those and can touch. But if you take that point of view, which most people cannot possibly sign on to, then there has to be some sort of action that theoretically could be taken. But without knowledge that you may be facing this dystopian outcome, I don't see, but human nature is not likely to be galvanized. I've often had the thought that if there was some playwright, or somebody in Hollywood who could construct, some sort of media vehicle where, for example, or for maybe you'd have people reacting to the short-term outcome, the medium-term outcome, and maybe the longer-term outcome. But, to actually have people like it was, kind of like what you see on soap operas or dramas, actually, this is what you're in, and people having a conversation about how they're going to cope with it. Because most of the population in the United States, anyway, is completely hypnotized by the media. They spend a good deal of the time every day watching TV. It's very comforting to them, or they go to movies. Those who can afford it will go to plays, etc. But it's very hard to penetrate. And I'm talking in the United States, the American consciousness. One other thought, with radical collective intelligence, and Jamin, I remember your first mention of it that I ever came across, which was when you had the original Guy McPherson presentation at the East Bay Sierra Club. And one of the things that, hit me was, we're talking about people from different parts of the globe potentially participating. And I think that, at this point in time, as the resources become in shorter supply, primarily because of climate change coupled with overpopulation, what we see is this kind of tribalism evolving. And here in the United States, we're a very diverse, we really are, diversity is always in the news, but we are a totally diverse country with all sorts of different tribes coexisting, not necessarily in a peaceable fashion, but that's what we have in the United States, a bunch of ethnicities and races and variants and all of that. But if you go to other parts of the world, like Japan or China, for example, you have pretty much a pure one tribe population that as time starts to go forward will become more and more concerned with the welfare of our tribe vis-a-vis everybody else. And so and there's language barriers. Each tribe has their own language, which is a huge barrier right there. So I think these are some things which need to be, if possible, taken into account, and certain kind of connections be made. It'd be great to have a group in China. I don't know if that's possible because of the censorship there and the media control, or in Japan. And I remember, I think it was maybe it was Michael or you, Jamin, who had at one point you were talking about. I think the guy's name was Sato. Some sort of connection there. But I think this is really important stuff, to be able to have people who are knowledgeable about what's going on in different countries, different tribes, be able to step forward and kind of join in here. So I wondered what your thoughts were concerning that.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I just wanted to give Jason a chance to speak before I weigh in again. If you'd like, Jason. No pressure.
I mean, yeah, it sounds good. I guess I could try to open up my own conversation about something. And I definitely think it would be good to broaden the conversation to other countries if other people could open up conversations in their own countries and start doing the same thing, just because it is sort of hard to hold it with people from multiple different languages in one thing. I mean, people should start talking about it, and even if it's, as we start to talk about it and give people a place to talk about it, then I think it could, possibly be helpful in waking everybody up. Or at least realizing they're not alone, and that, they shouldn't have to feel like they're part of a separate tribe, that we're all humans, we're all pretty much the same, and we have the same needs. And if we don't civilization doesn't start figuring salvage this situation, that the collapse is going to be very, very rough, and that really everybody has about it, that would be great. So I don't know. That's all I have to say. Go ahead, James.
All right, great stuff, you guys. So what occurs to me is that we could start these kind of separate conversations, start to kind of break out from one general social club at the end of the world to various breakout topics. And it also occurs to me that as we do that, how if an Amish family, a young Amish family wants to build a barn, right? They don't just do it themselves. They get the rest of the community to help them raise the barn. Once it's raised, okay, then it's their barn, and they're kind of, more or less on their own, so to speak. They're still part of a big community. Likewise, let's say, Jason wants to start his own breakout conversation or series, right? Just like this is a series, Social Club at the end of the world. If Jason wanted to start his own series on growing your own food, then we, the rest of the, Amish community, to use the metaphor, could join Jason for at least the very first inaugural conversation on that topic. And we could even do it on this very time slot. Say, we're not going to have the normal social club at the end of the world this week, so that we can help launch Jason's series. Likewise, with, a topic that you may want to lead, Dan, on, and, you've mentioned multiple ones of those: death with dignity, the broader question of how do we penetrate the resistance? That's a great topic. How do we penetrate the resistance, the deniers, the people who are asleep? Another related topic could be a drama, a Hollywood, playwright, writing a drama on this. Okay, great. How do we support them? How do we, have a conversation or a whole series of conversations on what that might look like? And then some playwright or even the collective could get together and actually write up a script for that. And then a whole separate one on, the topic of, this is what you're in, what we're all in and what we're all in for. How are you going to cope with it? For the multiple purposes that we discussed, that conversation could be valuable for. And of course, I've got my own little short list of topics that I'm itching to launch. One of which is a series on radical collective intelligence itself, kind of the container for all this. Another one on refreezing the Arctic using, thin film reflective materials, because, beyond radical collective intelligence itself as a crucial platform for enabling all of this that we're talking about, within that, the head of a pin topic that I think we really need to concentrate on with tremendous urgency is actually implementing solutions for refreezing the Arctic. Geoshading and whatnot, thin film reflective materials, whatever the case may be. So I'm red hot on that one as well. But I did promise to also kind of show a little bit about what the gist of radical collective intelligence is, but I don't want to be total microphone hog here. So I'm going to first go on mute, see if you guys have anything else to say for the time being, and then I'll be happy to present. And if you want me to just present straight away, just say that and go on mute. Going on mute. Okay, I see.
Yeah, I'm good with you presenting. I'm good with you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Jason?
Sure, go for it. I'm going to definitely leave this call today before 12 o'clock, just so you know. I like the ideas. I'd like to see some more concrete action myself. And I like this idea of this being sort of a place where we can chat with each other about our own sort of paths. And I like the idea of maybe doing the first one on this general one so that it can sort of maybe pull people into another conversation. I guess it all depends, maybe you just create one, anyways, it's a good idea. So go ahead, let's hear your get on the soapbox there, Jamin, and you just talk it up, my brother.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Dan. Okay. So, and this will be just kind of like a dry run of what I really ultimately want to boil down to a 5-minute video on radical collective intelligence. And so I'm going to start out. I'm going to do a screen share first. Let me just make sure I get all my ducks in a row here so that when I do screen share, you don't see like a bunch of porn or something, but rather what I actually want to show. So getting very close to that. All righty. Okay. All right. So going on screen share. And so the first thing is I just want to show some slides. It's like, so, what can you all see that? It says solving. You should see solving problems on the screen. The beginning.
I can see you fine.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the first, you start with the objective. What is the point of radical collective intelligence. It's so that we can solve problems, like the problem of the melting of the Arctic ice and the consequent extinction of humanity that would naturally result from that, et cetera, et cetera. We need to solve these problems. So that's, well, what problems are we really focused on? Well, abrupt climate change, melting of Arctic ice, desertification, rapid heating, drought, storms, floods, et cetera. And we point to the work of Professor Guy McPherson, who's the world's leading voice on abrupt climate change and its likely consequences. Arctic ice is a really, really, really big one that I was mentioning, and I like to point out, and will point out in the 5-minute presentation, that this is sort of like a dry run for, is that, you know, why is Arctic ice so important? One of the reasons it's so important is it reflects away sunlight. It really does two things. It reflects away sunlight, and it's sort of like a heat sink to be like the air conditioner of the planet. Both of those go away when we lose the Arctic ice. So instead of sunlight reflecting away, it gets absorbed into this dark blue ocean that the Arctic is becoming, and we just get catastrophic runaway heating. So, you know, it's acting like a giant mirror. It's reflecting away most of that sunlight that hits it, 80 to 90%, depending on the angle of the sun and day of the year and whatnot. But it melts, it goes away, boom, we lose that mirror. So that's the big urgency there. And, you know, a lot of people have talked about the surface area of the Arctic ice, which has been shrinking. But what's actually even more catastrophic than that is the volume of Arctic ice, which is just falling off the cliff. So again, back to Professor Guy McPherson, you know, what do we, you know, the Arctic ice, he mentions that as probably the final tipping point, which could happen as soon as this summer. And then if the Arctic ice goes, what happens? Well, Arctic Ocean water heats up. The methane that's been trapped for millions of years at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean floor and in the permafrost and whatnot, that would then start skyrocketing. It already is, you know, skyrocketing. Just look at this graph, for example. It's really ramping up. But it would ramp up even faster. And then, of course, lose the Arctic ice, and then with more methane being released, and you get other self-reinforcing feedback loops resulting from this excess heating of the planet, like all the wildfires that we've had in California in the last year and in the state of Washington. This last summer, Greenland caught fire for the first time ever. This is what happens when the planet heats up. And then, you know, other self-reinforcing feedback loops that are catastrophic include ocean acidification, which is a whole other topic unto itself. The acidity of the ocean is increasing, as you can see here on this graph, which is basically pH. As pH decreases, that's acidification increasing. And then the concentration of basically dissolved CO2 in the ocean keeps increasing, and it's saturating. Both of these have just been essentially perfectly tracking the rise in CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. And so, you know, we've got all these self-reinforcing feedback loops that point in the direction of increased catastrophic heating at a rate that we haven't seen before. Or have we? And then, you know, look back in the last hundreds of millions of years, the planet has spent most of its time way up here at this high temperature hothouse state of global average temperature around 22 degrees C, about 10 degrees higher than where we are today. And so if we look at it from this big perspective, a few things jump out at us. The first is we spend most of our time in a hothouse state. Like, so if there is a stable state for the planet, it's hothouse. These cool periods that we've had have been very short-lived, and it's kind of like a bouncing ball. They hit bottom and then they bounce back up. So we're in the process of bouncing back up. And in the past, you've seen some periods of extremely rapid heating. These lines are essentially vertical. And that's really the great concern, is that we're about to go vertical again, jump 10 degrees C. and which would make all of these catastrophes that we've been observing, they would make these look like child's play. Just the beginning, early precursors of the planet just radically transforming, burning up, releasing even more CO2 and methane, and curtains for basically for life on Earth. So that's kind of like, kind of the motivation for why we're even concerned about radical collective intelligence in the first place, is that we have a dire, dire need to solve these problems rather than just sit back, let them progress, and then we're all dead in a couple of years. Let's do something about it. Okay. So how are we going to invoke? So what is this radical collective intelligence? What does it do? What does it mean? How does it work? And so let me just go off of screen sharing for a moment so we can get back to each other's faces. All right. So what's the big idea about how we can solve these really big problems using this thing called radical collective intelligence? There's 3 key ingredients that I'll talk about for what radical collective intelligence consists of and what makes it so powerful for solving these problems. One is the power of conversation. Now, humanity is highly evolved to converse with other humans. So much of our massive brains are, for language processing and, communicating and whatnot. For millennia, for the entire period of human existence, the whole reason that we've been able to achieve so many things and avert so many crises and catastrophes, mostly at a local level, are because we're able to put our heads together and talk. As we say in Mexico, hablando se entiende la gente. Talking, we understand each other, and we can put our heads together and co-create. So ingredient number 1 is just conversations like we're having right now. The second ingredient is an application of collective of artificial intelligence to those conversations to really extract the maximum value from the conversation. Imagine you've got an orange and you just want to extract the most stuff from that orange. You want a juicing machine that just juices it to perfection and then separates the juice from the pulp, from the rind, from the seeds, from the stem, so you can use all these components. That's kind of the simple kind of cartoon picture I put, is we want to juice these conversations and extract the most knowledge and information from them. Why and what we'll do with that extraction we'll discuss in the third ingredient. But the first ingredient is conversations. The second ingredient is extraction of the juice from the conversations. And then the third ingredient is what we do with that juice. So the second ingredient I summarize with the acronym TIM: transcription, indexing, mapping. Now let me unpack each of those. Transcription means we transcribe what is said in the conversation into text. And for that, we need to record the conversation. That's one of the reasons we record these conversations. This conversation is being recorded, for example, so we can transcribe it. Once it's transcribed, we go from T to I to M. I is indexing. It's what Google does. They've indexed the whole internet. We will index these transcribed conversations. The third is mapping. We map these so the artificial intelligence listens in, transcribes, indexes all the conversation, then says, okay, now what Jamin was just talking about, refreezing Arctic ice, I'm going to map that to the topic of refreezing the Arctic. And when he mentions using blimps, I'm going to map that to the subtopic of using blimps to help refreeze the Arctic, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so there's this mapping of the components of the conversations to a kind of growing structure of topics. I use the word taxonomies a lot. What I'm about to do now is do a screen share and play about a 1.5-minute video, which is part of a 4-minute video that I highly recommend, because this is one of the inspirations for radical collective intelligence. And A, I want to give credit where it's due. This is Dr. Tony McAffrey's work as published in the Harvard Business Review. But B, it's a really great visual. So I'm going to spend about 1.5 minutes. So sit back, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and enjoy the next 1.5 minute video on what's called brainswarming, which is, like I said, an essential component or ingredient of radical collective intelligence. Uh-oh, what just happened here? Okay. I just want to get to the right starting point. Come on. Come on, baby. Okay, I may have to refresh this page. Refreshing the page, which will probably make us watch an advertisement for...
Hi,
oh,
I'm
good.
Dr.
We don't
Tony
have to watch
McAffrey.
it. Okay.
Brainstorming, the prep to dinner.
Okay.
If we make a problem-solving graph,
Okay, here goes.
then humans can quietly leave their signals, that is, their ideas, for others to build upon. In a brainstorming graph, the goal grows downward into refined sub-goals. Resources are interacted together and grow upward. When the two directions connect, solutions start to emerge. Let's see how brainstorming would handle a classic management problem, like this real-life conundrum.
Okay, before the case study starts, now we're about to get right into the heart of it. But what he just showed on the screen was quite profound, and that's part of the general methodology of you've got a problem, which the solution of which is expressed as a goal, right? So any problem can be mapped to basically the goal of solving that problem, but that's made very specific, as we'll see in this case study. So this is a case study that has to do with ice, but it doesn't have to do with refreezing ice. It actually has to do with kind of the opposite, which is getting rid of ice on power lines. And they just happen to use this one example. Not that that's one of our top priorities, but let's just follow the example so that you see how the process works. But even before we get into that, I'm just going to rewind what he just showed about the goal, refining the goal, and then using resources. And then I'll just let it roll. Here goes.
In a brainstorming graph, the goal grows downward into refined sub-goals. Resources are interacted together and grow upward. When the two directions connect, solutions start to emerge. Let's see how brainstorming would handle a classic management problem, like this real-life conundrum at the company Pacific Power and Light. Winter storms in the Cascade Mountains leave power lines loaded with ice, which if left unattended will break the lines. Having workers climb the poles to shake the lines is both dangerous and time-consuming. Management searched for a better method for years. What if they had used brainstorming? To start, they would simply place the goal at the top of the brainstorming graph and a few known resources at the bottom. Then the group would be instructed not to talk, but to simply add post-it notes and drawn lines to the graph. People who are naturally top-down thinkers would start refining the goal. Other naturally bottom-up thinkers would analyze how the resources could be used, or they would add new resources. Pretty soon, the two directions would connect, an indication that the group is finding ways to use the resources to solve the problem. This figure shows a careful refinement of the goal, as well as Pacific Power and Light's actual solution of using the helicopter's downdraft to shake the lines enough to remove the ice. Other solutions are also shown, including using a helicopter to drop a de-icing agent onto the lines, and using the conducted electricity to generate enough heat to melt the ice on the outside of the lines.
All right. So with this, it's just a great example because the graphics are great and he narrates it really well, and that's why I like to show it. Not that removing ice from power lines is our biggest problem. It's certainly a problem for a lot of power companies and their customers. But it's the methodology that I'm really highlighting here. So you've got the problem is ice on power lines. The goal then becomes remove the ice from power lines. Pretty straightforward. So then he says, let's refine this into sub-goals. I don't like the term sub-goals. I prefer the term ways. These are ways of achieving the goal. One way is to shake the lines. Now notice that he hasn't specified how to shake the lines yet. It's just shake the lines. Another is prevent the ice from forming in the first place. Again, at the level of that orange box, it's just prevent ice from forming. It's not, doesn't say how. And the third way is to warm the lines, again, without specifying how. Okay, now, from those ways, as you go downward in the taxonomy, this is an example of a taxonomy. As you go downward from those ways, I call these sub-ways. They're, you know, like much more specific ways. So if shaking the lines is the way, how would we shake the line? Well, one is physical contact. You know, establish physical contact with the lines and then shake it, you know, like using a pole or something like that, like this pole over here. But that's getting ahead of ourselves because we haven't even talked resources yet. Another is loud sounds. Use sound to shake the lines. Another is strong wind. Okay, that's all makes sense. Prevent ice from forming in the first place. One way to achieve that is to apply chemical treatment to the lines. That wouldn't be my favorite, but nonetheless, for completeness, let's consider all possibilities. And then the third way is warming the lines. There's two kind of that's one way to remove the ice from line. Warm. Two subways are apply heat beneath the lines, right? Like, you know, I don't know, a flamethrower or something from below. And then the other is to apply heat outside of the lines. And then you see how some of these subways break down into subways, ways of achieving those subways, as you can see here on the picture. So, and then of course, see, and he makes the point that top-down thinkers would kind of flesh out this top part of the taxonomy, whereas bottom-up thinkers who think in terms of resources would flesh out the bottom part of the taxonomy. And what's notable here is that each of these, you know, elements that you see here, whether it's a resource, whether it's the goal itself, whether it's ways to achieve the goal, or subways or subways, each of these is a topic. Okay, so just imagine in a simple world, very different from our own, where there are no problems. The only problem in the world is that we've got these ice on these power lines. Man, if we could just get the ice off the power lines, life would be perfect. So the second ingredient of radical collective intelligence is no more and no less than listening in on the various conversations that people have about this problem, and then transcribing those conversations. The AI does all this, transcribes them into text, indexes the text, and then maps the text, maps like the individual sentences or even parts of sentences. It maps them to these various topics. He's basically saying, okay, Dan's been talking for a couple of minutes, blah, blah, blah. What's he talking about? Is he talking about shaking the lines, that way of removing ice? Is he talking about warming the lines? Is he talking about using poles? Is he talking about helicopters? What's he talking about, right? Fortunately, now in 2018, we have the technology to do the second ingredient of radical collective intelligence, the acronym TIM, transcription, indexing, and mapping, so that we figure out what's Dan talking about, what's Jason talking about, what's Jamin talking about, what are all three talking about? Because we may be talking about different topics over in different parts of our conversation. So in the end, we map that conversation and its portions, its parts, to this whole toposphere, to this whole taxonomy of topics. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment and take a breath before I talk about the third ingredient. But even before I do that, I'm going to go on mute and just see if anyone has any questions about ingredient number 1 or ingredient number 2, either conversations in their own right or TIM, transcription, indexing, and mapping, before I unveil the secret third ingredient. Woo! Going on mute.
You know, as I was looking at the diagram on brainswarming, I kind of, in a very, you know, obviously a crude, top of the head way, I put as, you know, the problem, freeze the Arctic, you know, up at the top. Okay. Then I went down to resources, you know, and this may be a mistake, that these aren't actually, that maybe this doesn't constitute resources, but I put down nuclear bombs, you know, in other words, using nuclear bombs to create a nuclear winter, which would freeze the Arctic. I put down fracking technology you know, as a means of, and probably that doesn't belong there, but anyway, of extracting the methane from the exposed, you know, methane hydrates. And then I put down solar radiation management, you know, of different types, which act, and I don't know exactly whether those really constitute, maybe the nuclear bombs constitute a resource, maybe fracking technology, solar radiation management that is there. I'm not sure, but the thing, you know, the thing is, you know, in terms of the problem there, which seems like the most central issue, you know, if Guy McPherson is correct, if Peter Wadhams is correct, Jamin, if you're correct, you know, because you've been kind of underlining that of late, if I believe that myself, if the Arctic meltdown isn't stopped, and by the way, you know, that ice also protects the methane hydrates that exist on these shallow, you know, continental shelves that, you know, are there. I mean, and so if we don't do something about that, we, you know, it's over, and things will run away in a fashion which eventually also not only is going to cause forest fires and etc. It will ultimately devastate our, you know, food supply, because the grain growing areas around the globe in the northern latitudes in particular will eventually not be able to produce. And at that point in time, you know, you'll have food stocks, etc., I guess, to last emergency for a while. But at the end of the day, you know, time will really be running out. And so it seems like, you know, maybe we'll all get a break. You know, the Arctic will go down, it'll melt, and somehow, you know, God will intervene, and all of these consequences which seem logically to flow from it will not actually happen, and life will go on, you know, normalcy of some kind. That seems like a very unlikely probability. You know, it's unlikely that that's going to happen. But you know, in a sense, and you know, again, I was thinking, and then I'll let you go you know, it would be nice having the president of Finland, or the prime minister of Finland, I forget his exact, you know, who's a leader of a country, Finland, who basically was willing to say, if we lose the Arctic, we lose the globe. You know, and it's kind of like, hello, let's hear what he's talking about. And if anybody can refute what it is he has to say, or some of these other individuals, let them come forward. But again, how absurd is it that you have the president or prime minister of Finland, when he's in a meeting, you know, during that time frame with Donald Trump, that can't even get any news media traction, what it is he said. So I'm going anyway. Those were just some thoughts that came to me. I'm going to sign out and let you go back to the radical intelligence presentation.
Great, thank you, Dan. So just to recap, we've got these two main ingredients that I've talked about. One is just conversations. The other is transcription, indexing, and mapping. Mapping to what? Mapping to a taxonomy of the problem, like removing ice from power lines. Later, we'll talk about multiple problems in parallel. But right now, let's just keep it simple. There's only one problem on planet Earth, and that's removing ice from power lines. We talked about the ways, subways, sub-subways, and then resources, and then ultimately connecting the two. All of that, every element of that, including the connections between resources and ways or subways, all of those are topics that need to be addressed. How? In conversation. So with the transcription, indexing, and mapping, we map conversations to this toposphere. And actually, in the process of having conversations, we can generate new topics, new ways of refreezing the Arctic, like Dan just mentioned, a number of ways. So part of Radical Collect. So the second key ingredient is transcription, indexing, and mapping. to build out these taxonomies and map conversations to them. And then the third key ingredient, and this is where it really all comes together, is another application of artificial intelligence, which would actually be the most sophisticated at all. Actually, transcription, indexing, and mapping are quite sophisticated applications of artificial intelligence, but this third ingredient goes way beyond those, which is forming connections between individuals, between groups, between conversations and topics, between conversations and other conversations, between individuals and other individuals, between individuals and groups. So let's talk about some examples. Over the course of the artificial intelligence, listening to Dan, to Jason, to Victoria, to Jamin, to everyone who's participating in the conversation, they will get, the artificial intelligence will have a very clean view of which topics each individual is talking about and which topics each group or conversation is talking about. Based on all that knowledge, they can basically say, okay, there are a dozen people around the world who are each individually talking about and mentioning using thin film reflective material to cool the Arctic. But amazingly, none of those 12 people know about each other. In other words, Jamin saying thin film, thin film, thin film in a conversation that ends up talking about other topics because he's the only one who's really proposing that in this group, let's say. Meanwhile, there's a dozen other people around the world who are also clamoring for thin film, thin film, thin film. But again, there's no one else in their immediate sphere that that's resonating with. The artificial intelligence could basically be kind of like this, the eHarmony of solutionaries, this third ingredient, this connection capability, can be like the eHarmony for solutionaries, saying, hey, let's connect all these people who are passionate about using thin film reflective material to refreeze the Arctic. And so then the thin filmers can get together, and then the blimp people can be connected together. The permaculture people can be connected together. The people who say, hey, we need to wake up the influencers, they can be connected together. And then you basically find your micro tribe, or more typically, your micro tribes plural, right? So the connection layer of the radical collective intelligence could basically give me a report and say, okay, Jamin, I understand you're interested in these and these and these topics based on what you're saying in your conversations. So I'm now suggesting you connect with these other individuals and other groups. And in fact, I'm going to suggest a time and a place, looking at all of your calendars, you dozen people who don't even know each other, have never spoken with each other, don't know of each other's existence. I, the connection layer, can see all of your calendars, and boop, I'm going to suggest a time that you all can get together. And maybe out of those dozen, maybe 6 or 7 show up, and we have a blast, and we talk about, and that becomes the beginning of a focused series of conversations on using thin film reflective materials to cool the Arctic ice. That's the power of the connection layer. And the connection layer actually even goes quite a bit deeper than that, because you see how, like, you know, with Dr. Tony McAffrey's example of removing ice from power lines, you kind of have this evolution of ways and subways and sub-subways, and this evolution of resources connecting together, combining, and being used to apply to those ways. As this evolution happens for various different problems or various different goals, the connection layer can actually help identify where there's a gap. Okay, you got these resources down here that are kind of pointing in this direction. You've got this way and subway and sub-subway that are kind of pointing in the same direction, but they haven't quite connected. Let's bring together people who are looking at it from the way standpoint, or the goal or sub-goal, as Tony McAffrey says, and let's bring together them with some of the resource people that are talking about the resources that might achieve that. Let's get them all together and see if we can close the gap, right? How cool is that? Right? Or as the people who are kind of rooting down with a way and a subway and a sub-subway, but they sort of reach a dead end, the artificial intelligence, the connection layer, can say, okay, who can we bring in who have experience in applying similar ways maybe to different problems, but have in these different problem areas have found successful ways to root down and break through. Let's bring in some of those folks and see if they can't help out this group, this conversation, to root down even further and ultimately break through down to the resource layer and create a complete solution. So that's probably about as deep as I want to go as far as an introduction right now. And then the topics go much, much deeper. But let me once again go on mute and just see if y'all have any questions about the methodology per se of radical collective intelligence and the ingredients per se. Basically what I've been talking about. Does anyone have any questions about all that? Go on mute.
I think it's all good, actually. I think organically, as you try to form it and we try to work with you to get it going, it'll these things will get sorted out. But I guess my main point always is I'm not a computer techie guy, so I can't help you build the algorithms to this radical collective intelligence. So I would presume that maybe the first thing that you or we really need to do is find some people who are really capable of doing that work, creating the algorithms, creating the software that's going to manage.
We've already got a team in India doing that, and we're about to launch the first version of the platform in the next couple of weeks or so. So I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jason, but that's already done.
No worries.
So what I'm asking of you, just to be clear, not that you suddenly become a computer scientist and help us code it, but just keep doing what you are doing, participating in conversations, and perhaps branch out from this main trunk line conversation called the social club at the end of the world onto a new focused one, which might be food production or growing your own food or whatever you're most passionate about. And same with you, Dan, same with Doctors in Utopia, same with Victoria, et cetera, et cetera. Go on unmute because I didn't want to interrupt you. Back to you, Jason.
Well, I'm all good. I'm at the end of my time here. I think it all sounds good. Everything you said. I don't really have any questions per se. You guys can keep going on. I have to just leave and go get lunch and got to hang out with my daughter for a little bit. So, I mean, I can talk to you. I can think about which one I would take. Maybe that would be growing food even from an apartment, since that's what I've been doing here the whole time. I've been, listening, but I just got home from Costa Rica, so these gardens haven't had enough attention, and so I've been planting new seeds, and you can see I've been putting like my own natural mulch from the plants I tore up the other day on top of the dirt, so that it doesn't get so that the moisture stays in there.
Beautiful.
Sort of a technique the farmers were using in Costa Rica, just taking all the dead banana leaves, either putting them right into the soil or taking leaves and lining them over the dirt as a natural mulch to protect the soil and add to the soil, nutrients to the soil. And so, yeah, I'm all there. Just right now, I got to go. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody on the channel. Bye, Dan. It was good to see everybody's face and talk to everybody. I look forward to working on what you're talking about, Jamin, and have a good day, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Great to see you, buddy. Welcome home. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
So take care, Jason. Yeah, so I've got to conclude too. I'm sure you do too. So Jamin, just one thing came to my mind as you were just talking about having a team in India who have actually been working on the technical problems concerned with the collective intelligence. Are there individuals that you know of in India? And of course, in India, a different country, but a lot of people speak English there as one of their languages or their main language. Are there people in India who are on the same wavelength that we are here at the social club that you know of?
Yeah, that's a great. In fact, the owner of the company who is doing the software development, when he first basically bid for the job, because we put it out there and said, hey, we need a team or a company that can do this development work that we've kind of spec'd out. At first he was just bidding it to have yet another gig to do, another project to do, and employ he's got, I don't know, a few dozen people working at his company. When we started doing video conference hangouts to kind of get to know each other and see if they have the capabilities that we're looking for, and he learned about the problem space and watched some of our videos, he got extremely excited and said, wow. And then he shared the videos with the rest of the folks in his company, and they're all super fired up about it. And he is so gung-ho to see this through to completion and to see it to be a successful reality. He is literally donating his own time, which normally he would charge at a fairly high hourly bill rate. He's donating his time to this project because he's so passionate about seeing it succeed. And he wants to contribute, from himself, from his heart. And so, whereas I don't think, in general, this is such a hot topic in India, though it's probably heating up as they're experiencing more and more droughts and environmental catastrophes in their country. It's feeling to me like it's getting traction. And, ditto around the world. I mean, even look at a country like China, where there is just so much suppression of this conversation, as, they kind of focus on economic growth and development. There are nonetheless folks in China who are very passionate about this and active on this. I don't know the extent to which they've really got the leeway or the freedom of expression, but all the more reason for those of us who can to really take the lead on this. And, if nothing else, set the example for the rest of the world. But beyond that, create this platform that people can plug into and start to participate in, so that we actually begin to do whatever we can to solve these problems. And as I've said many times, I just want to make this one final point. When I say solve problems, I don't necessarily mean, I actually don't mean that we're going to be able to solve all of our problems, because I don't think that's possible at this point. Some problems are unsolvable. And there's a certain amount of damage that's just baked in. The 200 species that go extinct today, nothing's going to bring them back. So what I'm talking about is minimizing the harm, minimizing the damage, saving as much life on Earth as possible. But I don't think we're going to be able to completely solve abrupt climate change. I want to be clear on that. So it's, how do we save what we can save, from the pathway of the bulldozer of abrupt climate change that's unconsciously seeking to destroy all life on Earth? How do we save some life, maybe even a lot of it, maybe a little of it, but whatever we can save, let's save. And, rather than just throw up our hands and just say, okay, we're all going to die, so let's just love until we die. No, let's freaking do something about this. Anyway, going on mute. You're muted, Dan. You're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. As a final thing, before we check out, those who might be watching this as we're talking, or who will be viewing it over the next days or whenever. If anybody has any thoughts concerning some of the things I've mentioned about the potential outcome where time is very, very limited, perhaps only 10 years or so, and we're all going to have to confront our own death, and the deaths of children, grandchildren, etc. If there are any thoughts about how difficult that is to absorb emotionally, maybe they could put something down in the comments concerning their thoughts about that potential. Because my experience has been most people do not want to go there But the people who are watching this social club at the end of the world may be a little more predisposed to thinking about it and talking about it. So that's I just wanted to throw that out there for potential comments. And so I guess I'm ready to check out, Jamin. And so next week, I guess will be the following week. I won't be available because I'll be in transit out to Las Vegas, I think. Yeah. And, and be, if it's, and I will, maybe perhaps through email, etc., keep you up to date on anything that might come up there that might be of interest. And so anyway, I'll really look forward to seeing you next week. And I do appreciate so much the real hard work that you're doing, and in a sense, kind of leading this enterprise. I know it's a great energy expenditure on your part. So anyway, until next week, I'll say goodbye and take care. Okay.
Great to see you, Dan. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Next week, I know the following transit, but look for next week. And thank you all for watching and participating in the social club at the end of the world. Arigato gozaimasu. Thank you all so much. Take care, Dan.